And welcome back. You're listening to the Joseph Benamy Show for February the 7th, 2024. I am your host, Joseph Benamy. Thank you so much for tuning in if you're just tuning in, or if you have been tuned in, thanks so much for staying with us. All right. Hour number two. Look, let's just jump right into it. Tucker Carlson, our friend, the former Fox News, not anchor, but news show host. I don't know what to say. I do know what to say, and you're not going to like it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're a conservative, you're not going to like it. And you may not even like it if you're a liberal, but what the heck? I call them as I see them. I mean, that's the only way you can approach this stuff, okay? I can't let myself be so ideologically not tainted, but I don't know what the right term here is. Anyway, I know what I'm going to say here is going to get me into a little bit of trouble, but what the heck? If I only live once, so here it is, okay? First of all, there's lots I like about Tucker Carlson. I like the fact that the guy is fearless. I agree with him on many of the things that he talks about. Some of the things I'm not sure that I agree with. Some of the things he's just, I think, way out there in left field. And I don't mean that politically. I just think, Tucker Carlson convinced that we have UFOs, that there's a government conspiracy to suppress that information, etc. Come on, guys. Look, hey, maybe there is such a thing as extraterrestrial life. I don't know, okay, but I wouldn't spend a whole show promoting it, but and for him to be on there and saying, now we know. I don't know, Tucker. Okay, but let's just set all of that aside for a second. Let's deal with the Tucker Carlson question in a structured, carefully argued way. So my first issue is this. Okay, as I said, there are lots of things that I like about Tucker Carlson. And if nothing else, he's entertaining, okay? At a minimum, he's entertaining. But there are lots of things that I agree with on. But I don't think I like him coming up here to Canada, holding a town hall, and criticizing us for what we're doing here, or not doing. Even if he's right, I don't think it's the role or the place of American media personalities, even if he's right, to come up here and to lecture us on all of this, whatever's going on here. I'm not doing it. I would never do it. Not that I don't come close to Tucker Carlson's popularity. But if I was on that level, I wouldn't be traveling down to the United States and criticizing them for their domestic policies. If Tucker wants to come up to Canada and say, we have this international mutual defense treaty called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's not fair if we Americans are basically contributing all of this treasure in order to provide you in Canada and other countries in the alliance with some degree of protection. But it's supposed to be mutual defense, and we've all agreed that we're going to dedicate a certain percentage of our GDP to defense, to mutual defense. And you're not pulling your weight. If Tucker Carlson or any American comes up to Canada and he says that, that's fair game. Because we're not talking about domestic policy in Canada, even though the criticism may touch on domestic issues. Can we afford it? Can we not afford it? Do we even want to? But that's not the point. The point is, if Tucker wants to come up and he wants to say, we have an agreement, Canada and the United States, and you're not living up, you Canadians are not living up to your end of the bargain, that's fair game. For Tucker Carlson or for any American commentator to come up and to say, you guys are a banana republic because this is what you're doing with the COUTTS 4, holding people without trial. Okay, no, that's, with all due respect, Tucker, that's not your business. It's none of your business. Okay? We're a sovereign, independent country up here. And, I'm not going to come down to the United States and go on Fox TV or CNN or Newsmax or anything like that and talk about how stupid you guys are with your border crossing, not dealing with your border crossing. I may be right about it if I was to do that. It perfectly accurate. But that's not the point. The point is not whether I'm right or wrong. The point is whether or not I have the right to criticize your domestic policy. I don't think I do. And as a consequence of that, I would never do it. And so that's my first concern. That's a blanket concern. Hey, listen, yeah, Tucker, you want to come up to Canada and go hunting, moose hunting or whatever, and great, good for you. You are a decent guy. Like you a lot. Like most of what you stand for. I think you go overboard a little bit sometimes. Sometimes I think you're, as I said earlier, way off in left field, and I don't mean that politically, but you're entitled to your opinions on this stuff. And you're welcome in Canada, as far as I'm concerned. Anytime you want to come up here. But when you're here, don't abuse our hospitality by presuming that you have some expert opinion on what our domestic policy should or shouldn't be. Don't criticize us for how we're running our country. Even if you're right, okay? Even if you're right. Okay, it's bad form. It's not, frankly, if I could say so, it's not polite. So that's the first thing. But it's bad enough that Tucker's going to come up here and he's going to, hold forth on some of these domestic issues. But what really makes it a problem for me, okay, is when it turns out that he's wrong. That's a real problem for me, ladies and gentlemen. And let me tell you where, in this particular visit, he was wrong on a couple of things. Let's circle back to what we were talking about the first segment of tonight's show. Physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia. And I think that Tucker Carlson is spot on when he criticizes Canada's euthanasia policy. I don't think he should do it. I don't think it's any of his business any more than we should be going down and protesting in front of the state legislatures in Oregon, because Oregon has has a euthanasia program. I think that they shouldn't do it, but that's their business. Okay, if the citizens of Oregon want to have euthanasia, so be it. I'm not going to criticize their process. They have a political process. They have a democratic process, and that's it. So I think that Tucker Carlson's observations are largely right in principle, and I'm qualifying it. I'll get to the reason why I'm qualifying it in a minute. So I think he's correct in his principal views with respect to Canada's physician-assisted suicide program, MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying. But I just don't think that it's proper for him to come up here and to insert himself into that debate. But to make matters worse, he was just factually wrong on certain aspects of what he was saying. Now, in fairness, I didn't catch everything that he said. I didn't catch the whole thing, okay? I wasn't really that interested. But I've had segments of his talk forwarded to me, and where he's referring to the whole issue of medical assistance in dying. There are two things he talks about, and that is, first of all, the fact that we're killing people with mental illness. That's point number one. And the second is he talks about how the government isn't even publishing statistics, so you can't really say, how good or bad the program is, or not how good or bad, but you can't wrap your mind around, the data around the program. And you can't attack it from a data point of view. So those are two things that were brought to my attention. And I'm going with those, with the caveat that, understand, I wasn't in Edmonton when he was there. I didn't see and hear this firsthand. I'm only going by what was related to me. So if somebody's pulling my leg, well, then they're pulling my leg, and I will apologize for having had my leg pulled in advance. But I don't think I am. I think that this was brought to my attention in good faith, and I don't think that anybody was manipulating any video, etc. So, okay, so those are the two things. Well, the first thing is with respect to the killing of individuals who are mentally ill. No, we're not doing that. That is the controversy that we find ourselves in right now, is that the Liberal government did pass an amendment to the criminal code an amendment to the criminal code that was already passed in 2016 that would, once implemented, allow people with mental illness to avail themselves of physician-assisted suicide, even though they don't have a reasonable foreseeable death or whatever, okay? So he was just factually wrong. We actually are not doing that in this country. We don't want to do that in this country, and even the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau, even though they're the ones that drafted the amendment to make the new criminal code provisions consistent with the lower court ruling in Quebec on the question of whether or not it violates the rights of people with mental illness. And isn't that just an absurd proposition to make, that it violates their right to, liberty, life, liberty, and security of the person, or whatever the phrase is. And I'm going, yeah, it's somehow or other telling you that you don't have the right to access taxpayer-funded death is ruining your security of your person. I don't know. It's, the twisting of logic in some of these debates is so profound, and the only word that comes to mind when I think about this stuff is it's imbecilic. But in this case, it's also not true. Again, even the Liberals are against it, and that's why now they've again introduced legislation to further delay implementation of that provision of their amendment to the criminal code for another 3 years. Imbecilic, incompetent, inefficient, dumb, stupid. I don't know. You call it whatever you want. The fact is that we're not doing it. Not yet in this country, and hopefully we're never going to do this. And hopefully we'll even go further, and not that we're not going to do this, but we're going to find a way to roll back what we're doing now. Somehow recover our moral health. So we're not doing that. But Tucker Carlson comes up to Edmonton, and he talks about this way, and there's a whole lot of people that love Tucker Carlson. They love Tucker Carlson, and as a consequence of that, they take what he's saying at face value. So here's what happens with this, okay? So someone like me who has been involved in political advocacy, policy advocacy, etc., I I will get a call from individuals or organizations who want to fight the government on this issue. They want me to go before a parliamentary committee and to argue that we have to stop killing people simply because of mental illness. The problem is that nobody's going to listen to me when I say that because it's not true. We're not killing people because of mental illness. And again, I do not want anybody, please, do not take a soundbite. Don't misrepresent what I'm saying. I am not in favor of medical assistance in dying. I am not in favor of the euthanasia program. I think the whole thing is disgraceful, shameful, abhorrent, and needs to be terminated. Full stop. But if I'm going to fight for that goal, it's got to be based on facts, and I have to have a certain amount of credibility when I'm making that case. So, and by the way, not just me, but so do you. If you're involved in advocacy, okay, if you're going and meeting with your elected representative, you have to have a certain amount of basic knowledge as to what exactly you're arguing about. Otherwise, you hurt your credibility, and then nobody pays attention to you. They may be respectful, they may hear you out, etc. But when you walk out the door, they're shaking their heads and going, how could people be so badly informed? So that's the problem. Problem number 2, related to that, is this notion, where is anybody getting the notion that there were no statistics available for physician-assisted suicide in Canada? I mean, while, ironically, or coincidentally, the very moment, like that morning that I'm looking at this video that was sent to me where this allegation is being made, that very day, that very morning, like an hour before I looked at this video, I had in my hands the statistical report on physician-assisted suicide in Canada. We know how many people have had access to this. So, again, it's a question of credibility. You have nobody listens to you if you're bringing a case that's a false case. And of course, once you start getting into, you undermine, you hurt your credibility in this way, you destroy your credibility, nobody wants to listen to you on anything. They may listen to you out of politeness, but they don't take you seriously. So it's very important that you have the facts. And if you don't have the facts, then you need to just slow down and say, I'm not sure about this. And this, again, comes back to what I was saying in the last segment. I get so much information that is directed at me from all directions. It comes at me from all directions. Left, right, center, right, center, left, up, down, in and out, whatever you name your direction, I get it. And I've just reached the point in time where I don't believe any of it on the surface. I listen to it, unless it's really, really, really kooky. I try very hard not to dismiss it out of hand. I admit that I have dismissed certain things out of hand, and I'll even admit that sometimes what I dismissed out of hand turned out to be true. But as a general rule, I don't dismiss anything out of hand, and I want to see the evidence. I'm not going to take action on things that I'm hearing because, if you go to YouTube, for instance, or you look at some of the videos that are out there, I mean, with artificial intelligence now, you can take a Joe Biden or a Pierre Poilievre or a Donald Trump or a Justin Trudeau. You could take any of these individuals, take video that's out there of them, and then run some sort of computer programs to create new videos of them actually saying things which were completely untrue, that they didn't actually say them. It's a completely made video. And some of this stuff is very sophisticated now. Very sophisticated. There was a case I just came across my computer screen today. I haven't seen it picked up anywhere. Nobody seems to be talking about it. But the case was in Nevada, where they just had their primaries in Nevada. And that there's a company, I believe it was in Texas, that was doing robocalls of Joe Biden. And I don't know what the robocalls were, but whatever they were, it was a false thing. And so they were probably trying to provide false information to influence the outcome of the primaries. Yeah, you could do that. It's a lot easier to do it when it's just robocalls. It's harder to do it with video, but it is possible to do this with video now. And that's the point I'm making. So even when I see it on video, I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that skepticism in this day and age is such an important characteristic to have. You need to be a skeptic. You can't just assume that the information that's being provided to you is accurate, no matter how much you want to believe it, because it's consistent with what you believe to be true in the first place. I don't know. It's very hard for me to believe that there's a pedophilia ring at the highest levels of health officials across this country. Like a whole conspiracy, and a conspiracy to cover it up. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from allegations that have been made within the conspiracy theory groups out there right now. This was put in front of me this week. Yes, there have been some cases, a couple of cases where high officials in some health departments have been accused, one of whom was, I believe, convicted of some child sex offenses. I don't know the details. I do know that there was at least one case where it was true, but this does not make a conspiracy. This does not mean that there's a whole ring out there. But if you believe that this is what's going on, then the minute you see one person convicted of this, then, you're going to use that automatically as evidence of the accuracy of what your preconceived notions were. There's a term for this in psychology. It's called confirmation bias. We notice and give credibility to the things that tend to confirm what we already believed. Now, what I just said doesn't mean that there's no conspiracy, and it doesn't mean that there's no pedophilia ring. I'm just saying that I would not make the suggestion or the allegation that there was one based on no evidence. And one person is not evidence. Now, if you'd come to me 20 years ago with this, I would have been probably more inclined to believe it, because I hadn't had so much, 2 decades of experience with false flag. So you have to have a certain amount of skepticism, and that's one of the issues I had, with Tucker's visit up here this last week. Because I just don't think that it's his place to be commenting on euthanasia in Canada when you have euthanasia in the United States. I mean, go to Oregon and campaign against it in Oregon. I'm not saying you're wrong to be opposed to it. Of course, I'm not saying that. Yes, you're right, but you also have to respect our sovereignty as well. Okay, I feel almost offended. I just don't think it's right. Call me old school when it comes to this kind of stuff. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and if you're going to come up here and criticize it, at least make sure you have the facts right. Because in this case, you didn't have the facts right. And of course, I didn't see everything that he had to say on about every issue. So Who knows what else he got wrong? So you get this whole miasma of wrong information. And it's hard to sort out the truth from the falsehood, fact from fiction. But ultimately, if you're trying to get to the bottom of things and to make things right, correct problems, it's so important that we're able to separate fact from fiction. And unfortunately, from time to time, Tucker Carlson, and I think it's probably true of all of us, in fairness, we get it wrong. The problem is that when Tucker Carlson gets it wrong, it's pretty wrong, because he reaches so many people, and he has, he has quite a following, and so a lot of people just take what he says at face value. I have a few other issues with Tucker's visit I want to get into, but first we're going to have to take another break. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Don't go away. Okay, welcome back to the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for February the 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. If you're just joining us, thank you for joining. If you have been with us since the beginning or earlier in the show, thank you so much for staying with us. Very much appreciate it. So we've been talking about the Tucker Carlson visit to Canada that occurred last week, and got into a little bit about, the Tucker and some of the conspiracy theories that he buys into, etc. And one has to ask themselves, is this good or is this bad for the conservative movement? Generally, forget about Canada, just generally. And I, again, basically circling back to the issues that I raised in the last segment about making sure that you're accurate, making sure you have your information, etc. I think that, in balance, I think that Tucker Carlson is probably good for the conservative movement, but, the damage that he can do to the credibility of the movement and to the credibility of conservatives who are following him and taking what he says at face value, okay, the damage can be incalculable. And I think that I hesitate to say that he is a little cavalier when it comes to the, ensuring the accuracy of everything that he's saying, that he has all of his ducks in order and all the facts straight. I've never met Tucker Carlson, so I don't know. I assume that he has a staff that is going to do proper due diligence when it comes to making allegations and etc. But I just don't know. So I guess it's really your decision. Is it good or bad? But I wish that we had a little bit better handle in the conservative movement on what exactly it means to be a conservative. We're not going to get into that tonight. That is a subject for a different show as well. And I do want to get into that, but just not tonight. There were a few other things about Tucker that, in addition to what I've already said, I don't think that it's fair for him to come up here and criticize us for our domestic policies. Call me old school. I just don't think that foreigners should be coming to this country any more than I think that we should be going to the United States and criticizing them for their domestic policy. They have the right to make these decisions for better or for worse for themselves. I think that Tucker Carlson's criticism of, for example, euthanasia in Canada was fair. I think that some of the facts that he used to support his criticism were not just unfair, but were wrong. Okay, that they were not accurate, but that doesn't mean that he was wrong in his assessment as to the morality and the propriety of having a euthanasia in a country like Canada. But even as right as he is, it's not right for him to be coming up here and imposing himself, inserting himself into the debate. And unfortunately allowing him, and he's a controversial figure, and he knows that, and I'm sure he welcomes controversy because it helps him to promote himself, and that's not a criticism. He's, in addition to being a commentator, he is an entertainer to a certain degree. Okay, so that's great. But he had to know that by doing this, that he was going to have give some ammunition to the liberal government federally and to left-wing politicians and political parties to use his presence in order to brand conservative politicians here in a negative way. And it's not entirely fair to put that on his shoulders, but he's sophisticated enough that he had to know that that was a possibility. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And when you talk about low information voters, well, this country is full of low information voters. So there are a lot of people who are going to think Tucker Carlson is this extremist weirdo. Okay, I don't agree. I think that that's a wrong characterization, but there are a lot of people who are going to hear it and they're going to fall for it. And then they're going to go, well, if Pierre Poilievre is associated with Tucker Carlson or Daniel Smith is associated with Tucker Carlson, then they must be weird right-wing extremists as well, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. So there's no possible way when a guy like Tucker Carlson, he sucks the oxygen out of the room. So there's no possible way that he cannot become the subject, for better or for worse. And so, rather than dealing, for instance, with, what I would call, as I said in the first segment, the legislative incompetence of the current government when it comes to the euthanasia file, that's a very real, very serious issue that needs to have light shed on it. But instead, what are we talking about? We're talking about whether or not Daniel Smith is a Tucker Carlson acolyte, or Pierre Poilievre is. So the debate becomes about Tucker Carlson as opposed to the actual issue. And again, it's not fair for me to blame Tucker for that. Okay, it's not his fault, but he has to know that that's the consequence of him sort of wading into these domestic issues. So on balance, it's not just that there's a certain impropriety in him coming to Canada and inserting himself into domestic Canadian debates. Okay, even if, again, I stress this, even if he's right in his view, okay, I still say you shouldn't be involving yourself, and this is one of the reasons why you have to know that you have a great wake. You're like the most modern aircraft carrier. Okay, there's a canoe going through the water leaves a little wake. An aircraft carrier leaves a big wake. Tucker, you leave a big wake. And unfortunately, with your wake, we end up having to deal with your wake. I wish that we didn't have to on this particular file. Okay, so now there's another issue. Okay, and this I think is a legitimate criticism, and in this case, I think he is wrong about this in terms of what he's doing. In 1968, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong in the communist guerrillas in South Vietnam launched what has come to be known as the Tet Offensive. And it was basically a series of attacks on municipal centers in South Vietnam, all at the same time around Chinese New Year. And it was a colossal failure. It was a terrible defeat that they suffered, the communists suffered, as part of this particular offensive. But it really catalyzed the opposition to the war in Vietnam in the United States. Now, I don't want to say that most people in the United States were against the war, but even after this offensive, but it was very hard for people to start to say, well, how do we win this? What does victory look like? And how do we achieve it? And then how do we bring the boys home? All right. One of the consequences, and I know you're asking, you're going, what's this have to do with Tucker Carlson? I'm getting to that. One of the consequences, one of the outcomes, the results of this, what came to be known as the Tet Offensive, was that Walter Cronkite, who was the anchor of the CBS Evening News, the most trusted journalist at that time in the United States, made a decision. He decided that there was no way that America was going to win this war. It was time to look for an exit strategy. That was his opinion. For better or worse, he goes on national TV, and one of the features of news programs at this time was that the anchor gave, a 1-minute opinion piece at the end of the broadcast. And so that's what he did. And he put that out there to the American people. And it was, I don't want to say shocking, but it was a significant event that Walter Cronkite, the most trusted journalist and an American patriot, would basically go public and say, guys, I don't want to say we've lost, but I just don't see how we win. And it's time for us to think about how we're going to bring the boys home. Call it quits. My words, not his, by the way. Not long after he made this statement, he received an invitation. The invitation was to travel to Hanoi, the capital city of North Vietnam, to interview the leaders of North Vietnam. A media coup. Walter Cronkite in Hanoi interviewing the leaders of North Vietnam. Walter Cronkite declined. Didn't hesitate. Didn't think about it. Didn't wring his hands. Should I, shouldn't I? Journalistic integrity, blah, 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 blah. Okay. No. Thanks, but no thanks. And the reason was this. He had his views about what American policy should be. And maybe his views had changed. And now he was a supporter of, let's call him an anti-Vietnam War journalist. But he would never have allowed himself to be put in a position where he was becoming or facilitating the propaganda of people who were, okay, yes, to put it bluntly, killing Americans, American soldiers in the field. And I think he was quite right in that decision. And I think that, to this day, that, if he was still alive, I would certainly figuratively applaud him. I think that was the right decision. I think it was the honorable decision. I think it was the patriotic decision. I think it was the responsible decision. What does this have to do with Tucker Carlson? Well, it's just emerging now, as we speak tonight on this show, that Tucker Carlson is either going to or has completed an interview in Moscow with Vladimir Putin. And I presume that he's going to air that on his YouTube channel or Twitter channel or whatever platform or platforms he's using. And a lot of people are going to watch it. And look, if you've been listening to this show, I have some grave concerns with the way that the whole situation was handled between Russia and Ukraine. And I think that we in the West made some very big mistakes that contributed to the hostilities and that have not been helpful in terms of finding some sort of a peaceful solution to that particular conflict. I am not defending the Russians. I am not saying that Ukraine is wrong, okay? I'm not saying that they're entirely right. I'm just saying this. Whatever you believe in terms of the Ukraine war, and I know Tucker Carlson is very much opposed to the degree of support that Ukraine has been getting from American taxpayers and the support they've been getting diplomatically and militarily from the West. And I know that Tucker Carlson is an outspoken critic of that support. And for probably very good reasons. There's a lot of corruption there. Where is the money gone, etc. I think that some of those questions are perhaps a little simplistic, but I don't, and the invitation he's making to conclude that, we wrote them checks for billions of dollars and billions of dollars have disappeared. Again, this fits into the category of I'm a skeptic. I don't doubt that there's corruption in the Ukraine, but billions of dollars have disappeared. Well, maybe they have, but I'm a skeptic. I don't take that at face value. I know politicians from Ukraine, and yes, there's corruption. Yes, there are issues there, but it's not a black and white thing either. So, and in the circumstances, should we be supporting the Ukraine? Well, I wish that we didn't have to. Let me put it that way, okay? But I think that in the circumstances that there's probably very little choice based on some of the strategic issues that are going on, geopolitical issues right now in the world. Okay, so but again, this isn't about Ukraine. This is about Tucker Carlson. And the question now is you travel to the Soviet, I want to call it the Soviet Union, but you travel to Russia. You interview the dictator of Russia. I mean, let's not pretend that this person was democratically elected in free, fair, open elections. Okay, come on. So you really think that you're going to get the full story from him? Do you really think that you're not going to be, to a certain degree, manipulated? And I know Tucker probably has a lot of faith in his ability to not be manipulated by the people that he's interviewing. Okay, and maybe there's a lot of truth to that. Maybe he does have this magical capacity to see through the BS and somehow or other to bring that home to his viewers. I don't know. I do know this. There is no question in my mind that this is a propaganda coup for Vladimir Putin. There's no question that he's going to spew forth some of his own conspiracy theories. All right, and say what you will about Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is not a Nazi government, but I'm sure that you'll have Vladimir Putin talking that way because he talks that way already. That was one of the justifications for going to war in the first place. And people are going to watch this, and it's going to be a great propaganda coup. And for what? Tucker Carlson now thinks that it's appropriate to enlist Vladimir Putin in his campaign, that is to say, Tucker Carlson's campaign to change domestic policy in the United States vis-a-vis Ukraine. You don't need to go to Russia to interview Vladimir Putin in order to make that case. You're making the case already. I just think it's colossally bad judgment on the part of Tucker. It's akin to him coming to Canada and inserting himself in Canadian domestic affairs. Now, there used to be a principle, as rough and tumble as politics has ever been in the United States historically, and it's always been rough and tumble. Things are bad right now on the political scene in the United States, but it's not the worst it's ever been, and it's been pretty bad cyclically in the United States. So I would say, nobody should be overreacting to what's going on in the United States. But there used to be, as bad and as partisan and as controversial and as hardball as politics was in the United States, there was a principle, and the principle was criticism of the government, criticism of the President of the United States stops at the shores of the Atlantic Ocean in the east and the Pacific Ocean in the west. And what did that mean? That meant that when you traveled abroad, you didn't air out domestic controversies in foreign governments. The old saying, don't air out your dirty laundry in public. Don't give foreign governments, even if they're your friends, don't give them the opportunity to wedge you, to manipulate, to enlist you as an American. And the same applies for us here in Canada. Okay? Don't give anybody the opportunity to use your views in order to advance their agenda. Because I can tell you this, Vladimir Putin doesn't really care what's going on in the United States insofar as American citizens are concerned. He doesn't care about whether or not American support for Ukraine is good for American citizens or bad for American citizens. He doesn't care about social insurance. He doesn't care about welfare. He doesn't care about health care in America. He cares about how he can use whatever divisions there are politically in the United States to his advantage as the leader of Russia. And so it was just not done. You didn't go to another country and allow that other country to use you and your opposition to whatever is going on in the United States as a means of advancing their agenda. And I don't see how it's possible to view what's going on right now with the idea that Tucker Carlson is interviewing and plans on broadcasting an interview with Vladimir Putin. I mean, it's great for him for its entertainment value. It's great for him in terms of, viewers. But is it good policy? And I call it the Walter Cronkite principle. Walter Cronkite became a vocal opponent of American involvement in Vietnam. And Walter Cronkite was, in his day, as popular, maybe even more so, certainly as popular and maybe even more trusted than Tucker Carlson is today in that context, in that day and age, in the context of that day and age. But Walter Cronkite had the good sense to know that even though he was opposed to this, he wasn't about to allow, by the very virtue of his appearing in Hanoi next to the leaders of North Vietnam, just a photo op. Forget about an interview. Forget about him giving them a platform to advance their views, their position, their ideas. Just going and having a photo op itself is a propaganda coup. And Walter Cronkite would have none of it. He declined the invitation. Other journalists, of course, couldn't wait to get on the plane and fly to Hanoi and, get their picture taken and feel like they were doing a great service in the great and long tradition of journalistic integrity. Ha ha ha. Journalistic integrity. I mean, I don't even know what that is. All I care about with journalism is, are you accurate? Accurate, and don't be... Again, if there's a problem with the policy in the United States, and maybe there is, okay, maybe there is. I'm not passing judgment here. Maybe Tucker Carlson is exactly right on everything he says about the policy of the United States vis-a-vis Ukraine and vis-a-vis the Ukraine-Russia war. Maybe everything he's saying is correct. But the place to play that out, the place for that debate, the place for that discussion and argument is in the United States, not in Moscow, not in Russia, and not in any other foreign country. So in this respect, I think it's unfortunate that he's allowed himself, the way I see it, to be drawn in and I give the man the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's not thinking about it. Maybe he doesn't think that it's that important. But in my view, it is that important. So, as I said, Tucker Carlson, good, bad for the conservative movement. I think that Tucker can be good. I think he can be bad for the movement. It depends on the context. It's a toss-up, ladies and gentlemen. My personal opinion is, on balance, it's good. He's a good guy. But when he's wrong, as somebody once said about Winston Churchill is right on, spot on, dead on, right on so many things. But when he's wrong, oh my God. And that's kind of the way I look at Tucker Carlson. He's right on so many things. But when he's wrong, the damage that he can cause inadvertently is fairly significant. And because of that, because he needs to recognize that, and he needs to be, I think, a little more circumspect and perhaps a little more reserved, a little bit more, shall we say, self-skeptical. All right, well, I'm looking at the clock, ladies and gentlemen, and I see that we are coming to the end of the show. So, let's see. Do we have any housekeeping things to talk about? Well, the first is that if you did not catch the show live, you can, of course, catch the show on a podcast. But the Joseph Benamy Show.com. All of our shows are archived there, is MP3s. So, you can catch the show that way anytime. Pass it on to your friends. Let your friends and neighbors know. That's the Joseph Benamy Show.com. The Joseph Benamy Show, all one word. And of course, feel free to send me an email with your comments. Comments at thejosephbenamyshow.com. So again, one more time, comments at thejosephbenamyshow.com. And I think that's pretty much all I have to do for this week. So next week, make sure you join us, because we are going to have Tom Harris, who is the Executive Director for the International Climate Science Coalition. We're going to be talking about a lot of things with respect to climate change, energy policy, and other things that are related to those files. You won't want to miss it. Tom is a great speaker, very knowledgeable, very experienced, and he is not a BSer, as we like to say. So join us next week, ladies and gentlemen. In the meantime, God bless, and we will catch you next Wednesday night on the Joseph Benamy Show.